Ah, how y'all doing this evening? Thank you, thank you. Let's go and get this started. My name is Charles Hanna.
And my name is Michelle Lewis.
We are the owners of Third Eye Books and Sessions and Gifts. Thank you. Definitely like to thank Wyden and Kennedy for the space. Uh, Give thanks to all those who made this happen. Random House, Penguin Kids. But I'm not going to be up here for so long. I'm ready to get going. So I'm pass this mic on so we can get this party started.
Hey, okay. As my husband said, we really do appreciate all the support that you guys give us from the community. Thank y'all for coming out and, just sharing space with us. We're super excited about Jacqueline Woodson being here, and we're going to have a good time. So as my husband said, we do want to thank Wyden and Kennedy for opening up this beautiful space for us to use for this event, Pingo Random House, Jason Hill Photography, and we do have a wonderful proverbial ASL interpreter present with us today. Um, so if you do need assistance, please look for me if you need that one-on-one so that we can provide that support for you. So just a few housekeeping rules, if you arrived late and you have not gotten your book and you've been given a ticket, no worries. After we're done, you can go down and get your book and come back up for it to be signed. And we do have pre-signed copies of the book as well if you find that you do not want to wait in line. We are asking at the request, and she didn't have to make it, but she wanted to be very clear that we allow elders and that we allow children with caregivers and individuals who may have a form of disability to get their books signed first. As far as photos go, we have been having people ask, will she do photos? She's not doing individual photos due to the nature of her time. She has to leave right away. So when you come up to get your book signed, you filled out a little sticky note so that she can read your name clearly and sign it. We're just going to gently, politely ask that you move so that you can let the next person in and that we can, move the line up accordingly. I think, and also she'll be able to sign up to 4 books. Somebody had quite a few books, 4 books. Her newest one, Remember Us, and then up to 3 of the backlist books, which can be purchased downstairs as well. And I think I covered it all. Yes, that's it. So we're going to get into it. All right. So I really want to thank our moderator for this evening, Keisha Jose Fisher. She is the author of No God Like the Mother, a short story collection which won the 2020 Oregon Book Award in Fiction. She's also an Oregon Literary Fellow and an aspiring leader of her very own dog army. Much of her written work is guided by her childhood in Africa and America, and an unshakable urge to change the female experience in the world. As a former social worker for immigrant and refugee families, she now spends her days writing and advocating for social justice. Through her work, she currently lives in Portland with her spouse, children, and poodles, and is working on an upcoming novel and another collection of short stories, and sometimes she gets to sleep. So once again, thank you. Check us out on Third Eye Bag on the gram and on Facebook, Third Eye Books, and come by our store, 2518 Southeast 33rd and Division. We want to see you. Give thanks and praises for everybody being here. Thank you.
Can I get a standing ovation, please? These folks came. We have a Oregon Book Award winner, National Book Award winner in the house. In the house. This is beautiful, y'all. I didn't know it was gonna be like this, but I knew it was gonna be something special. So I'm gonna go ahead and get off the mic and let y'all have it.
You're at my house. You can keep your feet up. Thank you. Right. I'm gonna lose some shoes. Hello, everyone. Hello. Hello. turning this on now. Is mine on? All right. I had directions and I knew I was going to mess up on the way in. Thank you to everyone in this room. Thank you, Third Eye, for pulling this together. Thank you to White and Kennedy for providing a safe, warm space for us tonight. And thank you, Jacqueline, for giving us a reason to gather.
Oh, well, thank you, Keisha, for coming and gathering with us and asking me questions. It's exciting.
I got questions, right? You know, I before I read your bio, I just wanted to share, you know, that you're in Portland, I know you know this. Welcome, you know, we're also known as Rose City, we're known as Rip City, and former home to our beloved Damian Willard. Some of us are still saddened by this. And I just, you know, want to thank you for coming and being here with us.
Thank you.
To start, if I could share your bio, is that okay?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Is that the long one or the short one? Please don't tell me
It's
this is the long
I will, okay, just give me a kick when you want me to stop. Because you've done a lot of good. You've done a lot of great things here. And you deserve to happen. Jacqueline Woodson received the 2020 MacArthur Fellowship, the 2020 Hans Christian Andersen Award, 2018 Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award, and the 2018 Children's Literature Legacy Award, and was the 2018 to 2019 National Ambassador for Young People's Literature. And you're one little lines, and then give me the cake. Okay. A New York Times bestselling memoir, Brown Girl Dreaming, won the National Book Award. The Coretta Scott King Award, a Newbery Honor Award, and the NAACP Image Award. Yes. Okay. Very positive. There's so many, so many more accolades here. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, I can't imagine, right, what it's like to hold so many things in one place. You've done the work and you totally deserve it. We're proud of you. We're so grateful to you for coming to our city. As you can see, no hazmat suits required outside. You're safe here. You know, Portland faces challenges as any other city in this country. And, you know, you talk about you write about struggles, especially in Remember Us. Let's start with Remember Us. You talk about a city essentially going up in flames, right? And I'm curious about how it is that you are able to tap into how it seems to be that the adults are the ones creating the fires, burning down the cities, and the children get caught up in the smoke.
In Remember Us, so I think that's such a great question. So for those of you who don't know, Remember Us is a story about Bushwick in the 1970s, the Bushwick section of Brooklyn where I grew up. And the neighborhood was nicknamed the Matchbox because of the number of fires that happened in that area. And we came to find out that it was the landlord setting a lot of these fires and
Yes.
Setting the fires for the insurance money. So I do think that because I write to young people among writing to other people, I really wanted to show not only the impact of those fires on the young people, but also their resilience. And so in going back to that period, so Remember Us is nonfiction in that it's the story of those fires, but of course it's fiction because I made up Sage, I made up all the characters, I made up her dad, I made up her move and all the things around that. So I was gonna start from
Yes.
reading just from the beginning of.
Let's do that.
Okay. The moon is bright tonight and full, hanging low above the house across the street where an orange curtain blows in and out of our neighbor's window, out and in. And past the curtains, there's the golden light of their living room lamps. Beyond that, there is the pulsing blue of their television screen. I see this all now. I see a world continuing. And in the orange and gold and blue, I'm reminded again of the year when sirens screamed through my old neighborhood and smoke always seemed to be billowing somewhere. That year, from the moment we stepped out of our houses in the morning till late into the night, we heard the sirens. Down Knickerbocker, up Madison, across Cornelia, both ways on Gates Avenue, down Ridgewood Place, rounding the corners of Putnam, Wilson, Evergreen. Evergreen. Sometimes a word comes to you after time has passed and it catches you off guard. Evergreen. The name of a family of trees and the name of a block in Brooklyn. Evergreen. Another way of saying forever. That year, nothing felt evergreen. Palmetto, a word that has never left me, a word that in my mind is evergreen. Palmetto, the name for both a stunning tree and an oversized cockroach. Palmetto was also the name of a street in my own neighborhood, and that year, Palmetto Street was burning. That was the year when, one by one, the buildings on Palmetto melted into a mass of rock and ash and crumbling plaster until just a few walls were left standing. Walls that we threw our balls against and chased each other around. And at the end of the day, when we were too tired to play anymore, they were the walls we simply sat down by and pressed our backs into, staring out over a block that was already, even as we stared at it with our lips slightly parted and our hands shielding the last of the sun from our eyes, almost gone. We said, well, nothing lasts for always, right? We said, one day even the whole earth will disappear. We were just some kids making believe we understood, but we didn't, not yet. We didn't understand the fires, our life, or the world, but we knew that neighborhood was our world, and we knew our world was burning.
Mm,
Thanks.
thank you. Um, Thanks for sharing that, right? I was, jumping ahead of myself because I really wanted to get into the conversation about how it is that children do end up having to remind us to remember what it was like to be them, right? And that's one thing that I thought you did so well in this book. I inhaled it. I mean, I got it not long ago, and I hope everyone gets to read through this. And of course your children, but I was reminded of what it was like to be that little girl. I feel like I'm Sage, right? I mean, I grew up in Nigeria and I didn't have basketball, but we had soccer, that we call football, rightfully. And, and I was always the only girl who wanted to kick a ball around with the boys because boys were the most fun back then, right? When I was young enough to be able to play with them. And it felt like girls were required in the kitchen, cleaning, but the fun was outside. And you captured that so well. Can you tell us how you got there?
Well, so when I first started writing, I am a huge fan of the NBA and the WNBA. And it was such a short time ago that the WNBA didn't exist, and that Title IX didn't exist, and that binaries existed hard, right? And so this idea that as young people, when I was young, especially, having to make these choices, not only around gender, but around the games you were going to play. Were you going to be the girl who played double dutch and hopscotch and jump rope? And I mean, in jacks, or were you going to be the boy who got to be in the park playing hoops and football and Scully and all of these games? And so I wanted to create a character who challenged that and who asked those questions back then that I think so many people are conversing about now, but that didn't even exist back then, right? There was no language to talk about feeling like your body didn't fit in either place and what that meant, or feeling like your love for basketball was unacceptable to a whole crew of people. And also, I was very intentional about making her a really good basketball player because then, guys want her on their team, and I didn't want to just have the cliche of like, oh, you can't play, you're a girl. I wanted her to be a kid who was that good that she was going to play no matter what,
That's right.
and that it was going to be the loss of the team if she didn't play.
Yeah. Uh, and also kind of like, brings to mind what it was like to be 12, right? When you're so outside of yourself. Of course, we all want to fit in, right? We're told from day one that we all should fit in. There's a space for you. You need to fit in it exactly as we've told you to. And when that doesn't happen, you feel like you're broken somehow, right? And I said earlier, I grew up in a country where it almost felt like I wasn't allowed in the spaces where I thought the fun was right. Actually, I'll tell you, when I was exactly 12, girls would be sent on Tuesdays to go to home economics class to go learn to cook and sew and all the things. And the boys got to go to wood shop class to go build things. And I made the mistake here. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Americans were doing that same thing. All right, well, okay. So I made the mistake of asking to go to wood workshop with my brother. And I remember the talking to that I got from a teacher who said, so you mean to tell me you want to go and be a boy, right? When my curiosity was just, what are the boys doing? Why is it that when the girls, on Tuesdays, the girls, we felt like we were going to work. The boys were excited and high-fiving each other. What were they doing on the other side of the wall?
So interesting.
Right? And I don't know, you kind of opened my curiosity to that. Right?
That's great. It is true. I mean, I think I actually loved sewing. I still love sewing.
Right.
And it did start in home economics, but I did also want to be part of wood shop. I mean, and it is that interesting history that thankfully, hopefully, is gone, where there are these engendered choices that have to be made. But I do feel like in the world of Sage during that time, her questions were new, and they were also the questions of adolescence, right? I think I remember Madeline L'Engle, who wrote Wrinkle in Time, said, when you write remembering the child you were, because the essence of childhood doesn't change. And I really believe that. Like, we want to belong someplace. We want to be loved. We want our family to not be so weird. Like, there are all these things about life that we want. And I feel like this is her journey from childhood to adolescence and understanding. And I do feel like that journey is a journey through unbelonging. Whatever that unbelonging looks like, until you get to the place where you're like, okay, I'm home. I'm an adolescent now, or I'm a teenager now. I know kind of where I belong. But she's in that place where she begins to question it.
Yeah. And it doesn't help that, there's always the one, the mean boy who says, what are you doing here? Right. Can I touch on, without, the book is so new, we were just talking back there about how, most of us probably haven't gone through it yet. So I don't want to, spoil anything here. But the question I had was, we all process loss differently. And you do it through a child's eye in this book. You address loss and the void that death leaves behind. I hope that's vague enough.
Oh,
right?
we can talk about her. We can talk about her.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wonder, were you treading lightly, or was it just, that you dropped this heavy thing seamlessly into a children's book, and it feels like, you know, you address it, right? And we feel it.
You haven't read a lot of books. As you know, this is my book.
Well, no, I'm sorry, we're talking about Remember Us, so
Okay.
I'm just
No,
saying.
I think that so in Remember Us, Sage's dad is a fireman, and she's living in this place with all these fires, but they move back to his boyhood house,
Yeah.
and he has died in a fire, and so she has that shadow of missing her dad, and the most fun thing about writing about her dad was my niece Sadie is now a librarian. You know, I'm so happy. Like I have, you know, nieces and nephews doing all kinds of stuff, but Sadie is my dream child, and she's like delivered for us.
Yeah.
And so when I realized, because when I write, I don't know where I'm going, I don't outline and all of that. And when I realized somewhere, probably at the end of the first third of the book, that Sage's dad was going to be a fireman, I realized I didn't know anything about black firemen in the 70s. And so then I emailed Sadie and said, can you get me information about black firemen in the 70s?
Yeah.
And she got me all this information, including the information about the Vulcan Society, which I didn't know, which is in order of black firemen that I just found out the president is a black woman now. And it's an order of black firemen that was a fraternal order that was founded because it was so dangerous to be a black fireman back then because there was so much racism. And what would happen was white firemen, first of all, they didn't want to sleep in the firehouses with the black firemen. They'd send them into the most dangerous fires first so that they would get killed. And it was just all of this stuff. So the Vulcan Society started in order of black firemen and started, and they actually had an all-black firehouse in Crown Heights where, you know, they felt really safe.
Yeah.
So in writing her dad, it was really fun to discover stuff about firemen. And also, I think in terms of the heaviness of loss, it's our everyday, you know. And for kids, loss is a Tuesday, you know, and it's everything from losing a toy to losing a grandparent to losing a best friend. Even if it's for a couple of hours, it becomes a devastating moment in their lives, and it becomes an eternity because time. And I talk about time later on. You know, time feels like it goes on forever.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a way, and when we're writing to young people, that we can talk about stuff like loss, like love, like family, and do it in a way that, as I was talking about earlier, is filled with love and safety. You know, even the thing about Sage is she has lived to tell the story, and already the reader is thrusted into the safety of knowing that. But then and within that safety, they learn Sage's story. But it's also, Remember Us breaks the rule of middle grade fiction, in that middle grade fiction is usually the person who's telling the story, say they're 12, like Sage, is the age of who might be reading it, right? So the middle grade fiction, the protagonist is usually 10 or 11 or 12, and they stay that age throughout the book. And the book takes place over a school year or a birth year, yeah. And then the publisher is thinking, well, the people reading this book are going to be that age of the protagonist. But I broke this rule the first time in Brown Girl Dreaming because that book spanned 11 years. It was a memoir, of course, but it started before I was born and went till the time I was around 11 years old. And this is breaking that rule because Sage is an adult looking back at that time, right? So it's not a young girl telling the story in that moment. Yeah, it's someone older looking back on that time, and she's looking back with a calmness and a melancholy and a safety, so that again the reader's like, okay, I'm gonna be okay.
Yeah.
So I know that was a really long way to answer that.
Thank you. Right. I mean, I'm always curious about, you know, where a writer goes when they have to write about, you know, heavy things for children. I can't do it without oversharing about the worst parts of the world sometimes, and that's something I work on, right? And I want to be better at it. I always feel like I overshare. I don't know why. I've been exposed to too much as a child. But I thank you for, explaining it to us and that.
Oh, my pleasure. I could explain all day.
Right.
But it is interesting. It is. I think we all go through so much as young people,
Yeah.
and we compartmentalize, right? So we remember what we can hold. I'll tell you a story. So I read the Lewis Die for the first time when I was in the 5th grade, and no one could tell me that Pacola Breedlove didn't end up with blue eyes and live happily ever after. Because that was all I could accept in my little tiny brain with the words of the book that I understood, because so much of it I'm sure I didn't understand. And then when I got older and I read it again, and she ends up going, losing her mind, I swore that Toni Morrison had written 2 versions of that book. The children's version and an adult version. And it took a while, but it's that compartmentalization, and I think we do it, our resilience, as children comes from the same thing, right? Like, it's like, I can't deal with that right now, so I'm just gonna block it off, and maybe it'll come back up in therapy when I'm 30 or something. But there it is, it's a survival mechanism.
Do you think that's probably why so many of us have forgotten what it's like to be, right? To be young and to be a child,
Yeah.
right? That's why we make all the mistakes we make, because, we compartmentalize so much of it that it sometimes gets lost in there somewhere.
And no one wants to go back to middle school.
I mean, I said middle school is the curse I don't wish on anyone on my worst enemy.
And I remember so much about it, and I feel like when I write about it, I can go back and make it right for myself. And so but yeah, you have to go back to that place, and no, I would, but for a blank check in real life, I would not go back to middle school.
Oh, no, I would go back and tell Leslie W. Bob himself. It was not nice to me. I mean, I came to the States right at 12, right? Right into the 6th grade.
Wow.
In Houston, Texas, of all places. By the way, my first real American experience. I forgive all of you. Oh, goodness, this thing is trying to escape. But I do remember it being, there was a show back, that used to be on the Twilight Zone. It felt like walking into the Twilight Zone, right? A Nigerian 12-year-old is light years, behind in appearance, socially, right? I had my pigtails that I loved, my little ballet slippers that my mother bought at the airport on the way here, and showing up into a classroom where other 12-year-old girls looked like women was a shock, right? It didn't feel like people who looked like me welcomed me in, and I just thought, what is I don't know what this middle school thing is, right? It's the worst. It's exactly the worst. Unless you're in middle school.
Yeah, then it's the best.
If you're here and it's the best experiences come out of here. You do come out changed, and it's about remembering, right?
Yeah.
That it's not going to last forever. You are talking about how loss feels like it lingers in children, right? It'll last so much longer for them, and it doesn't last forever.
So true. It's so funny because my daughter, wants to be an actor, and one of her favorite shows is 10-15, and it's about 2 adults who go back to middle school. They're pretending they're girls in middle school, and it's so cringy. Like, it's one of those shows that you're cringing at every moment. And I think the huge cringe for me is like, oh wow, going back to middle school, like,
No, thank
any
you.
form of body, but
Right. Although I would go back there, these ice cream cones, like it's like dipped in peanuts and chocolate. I mean, Americans had it good. We had hamburgers on Thursdays and ice cream for lunch. Anyway, can we talk a little bit more, or should we move on? What's time like for Q&A? I'm sure you all want to also talk to our guest. Okay, how are you feeling?
I think we should take one more question, and then I think we should take questions.
Okay, all right. I know you've been around the world.
My life.
Thank you for stopping in our town.
Portland.
Thank
you.
Okay, you didn't want me to read all of your, but can I ask you, I mean, you've done amazing things, right? You've written a lot of beautiful books for us. And none of us get to live forever, but, your art will. how do you carry that? How do you, you know, walk around every day knowing you may think that we'll live forever?
Well, you know, this country is trying to erase it as fast as I make it. So I think, you know, when I look at my list of challenge books from Brown Girl Dreaming to Red at the Bone to Each Kindness, I just, I have to remember that hopefully, you know, we wrote these books, we write these books because we love the people we're writing them for. In this case, you know, the readers, and the hope is that they will somehow reach them, no matter how much people try to keep that from happening. You know, I feel like this is what the ancestors put me here to do, and I'm trying to make them proud. And I, yeah. And it's so funny because, you know, I feel like I've gotten a lot of awards. The MacArthur was the most surprising. And it took me a long time to accept it, but now every time my kid talks back, I'm like, you know, your mom's a genius, right? He gets so mad. He's like, no, that's just the committee. They could have chosen anyone. Like, he's such a hater. But I love using that line. That's fun.
I would have that tattooed on my forehead and walking around everyone else here.
I know my big sister got a shirt that said my sister's MacArthur genius, which is so sweet.
It's very, very sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm done enough talking. Anyone else have a question?
It could be for either of us, and nothing you could ask is wrong in this one.
Don't ask me a question.
The mic is.
Oh, I'm a teacher.
Oh.
I don't even know.
I love it. Let's go. I can hear you.
Sage and other characters process a lot about their identity. And when Sage asks her mom if she's pretty, as a queer woman who, when I was younger, was quite tomboyish, is that part of what is in Sage's processing of identity, or is this mean it's rejected?
Oh, no, it's so funny. I do think that I really wanted to visit that period where kids didn't have mirrors. And so there was, you know, there was no queer mirror, there was no non-binary mirror, there was no, you know, lesbian or gay or bi mirror. Like you just had to, you know, think of yourself as the only one like you. And in her neighborhood, that's what was going on. And so I really think it's important to look at that history, to know that history existed for young people, because like now they're queer kids of all ages, you know, they're trans kids of all ages, and for her at that time, it just didn't exist in that way. And even queerness was a binary, right? There were like stone butches and like, you know, high femmes and so or like, you know, very effeminate gay men. And just it was actually kind of fun to go back there and imagine the world before, because I'm so grateful for the world now that young people have. Again, if it doesn't get snatched away from them, where they have, as Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop talks about, mirrors and windows. So they have reflections of themselves, not only in their literature, but in the world. And they have windows into other worlds. But yeah, I was looking at that period where this child had very little in terms of sports, in terms of gender identity, and what that looks like for her, and her surviving that. Does that answer it?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that
Thank
question.
you.
We have room for, yeah. Someone raise their hand over there.
And where'd Michelle go with the microphone?
Michelle.
Is, is there another question? Y'all, you know you have me for like 10 minutes.
Right.
I'll ask you questions at the table.
Right.
I see one up there.
They're pointing across.
Oh.
Now, you know I can't see.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
It's the loud voice. I'm actually a librarian, so I'm working hard to make sure those books are getting to kids. And
Thank you.
so thank you for continuing to write these amazing stories for so many children. I have a question about some of your other books.
You can ask about any books.
Right.
Because I have a personal interest in kids that are experiencing foster care.
Mhm.
And you have both the middle grade novel and the picture book. Your picture book is the only picture book that I know of on Gracie that's about a character in foster care that's a picture book. And that's not like a didactic, you know? So thank you for having that. And I'm just curious where, like, I read also Visiting Day to my students, and you share about where that story came from. And so I'm just curious where that interest or desire to write about foster children came from.
So the question, if you didn't hear it, was writing about foster care and the system of mass incarceration. So foster care. When I was growing up, I knew kids in foster care. When I got out of college, I worked with runaway and homeless kids, a lot who have been through the foster care system. And I had never read a book. I think the first book I had ever read about foster care was Ellen Foster. And who wrote it? What was her name? Alice? It wasn't Alice McDermott.
It was, I'm not
Okay, it'll come back to us. But just to know, say it again.
Kay Gibbons.
Thank you, okay, Gibbons. That was good. And just the fact that I knew these experiences were in the world, but that they weren't being written about. And when I started writing, it was, I first started writing because there weren't a lot of books with kids who look like me in them. And I really had this sense of like the audacity of this world to not have me. And I know my kids say I'm conceited all the time, but I do think there was something I was taught that said you have a right to be in this world. And then in terms of incarceration, so I wrote Our Gracie Aunt, I wrote Locomotion, I wrote After Tupac and Dee Foster. I feel like there's another one that features foster care, but I can't think now. But then in terms of incarceration, so I wrote Visiting Day because I had grown up with my uncle being in and out of prison, and we were never allowed to talk about it. So there was so much shame in the family, like don't tell the neighbors, tell them that Robert moved upstate. And there were so many men in our neighborhood moving upstate, like, you know, and so, but that shame without a reason for it to be there. There's no reason you should feel shame about a broken system, and the fact that that existed. And I remember going to a public school, and the teacher had asked me not to read Visiting Day because no one there had anybody that was incarcerated. So I hate when people tell me what not to do. So I said, well, this is the book I came here to read. So, but I started reading it, and 4 kids interrupted me. They were like, my dad's in prison, my cousin's in prison, my brother's in, and the teacher's like, I just didn't know. It's like, no, because you didn't make any space in this classroom for this conversation to happen. And I think what Visiting Day does is it does make that space for that conversation, and not only about incarceration, but parents who are not there in all kinds of ways. And then, you know, Brown Girl Dreaming was when I wrote more about my uncle and his incarceration. But again, it was a story that here I am writing realistic fiction. I'm going to tell the truths that I know in that fiction, and so that the kids can have those mirrors again and windows in their lives. And it was wild writing Visiting Day and then finding out that James Ransom, who did the illustrations, also had a brother who was in prison. I didn't know that when I chose him as an illustrator.
Oh, we have a question up there. Thank you.
So I Googled you and I found out that you're 60 years old. I'm not putting you on blast.
Oh, I own every year. That's right. You earned it.
You look so young. It must be because you write, right? Like,
That's so funny.
but truly, what was it about that time period? I mean, you talk about the search for identity, the adolescence, but why do you keep returning to it? There are a lot of authors who will write 2 or 3 books for that demographic and move on and write something else? Why do you keep returning to it? What do you feel like you still have to say?
Oh, that's such a great question about, as an old lady, why am I why am I still going back and writing for children? It's a really good question, and I say, I have one more middle grade book in me, and that's it. I'm done with middle grade. I'm going to continue to write for children. I'm going to continue to write picture books, and I'm going to continue to write for adults. And I came to writing for adults really late. I wrote a book in the 1990s called Autobiography of a Family Photo, and that was my first foray into writing for adults. And I just didn't like the world. I mean, my ex-girlfriend reviewed my book for the Times. I'm like, what is this? Like that, it was like, what happened to librarians and critics and people who don't know you? And then like on every award panel, it was somebody who it was a world that didn't have the same kind of boundaries as children's fiction. And the people just weren't that kind. But I just felt like, when I was writing it in the 90s, it was a very white world of fiction. It was like Jane McInerney and Rick Moody. All of those guys were, Tamara Janowitz were like, it was their world. And then finally, Terry McMillan came along and kind of broke it, made things happen for writers again. I mean, we had Alice Walker and Toni Morrison and those, but that was kind of separate. And just people weren't getting published in the same way. But I just didn't like the world. And there's a way in which the world of young people's literature is a very loving world. I mean, we all know each other. This book is dedicated to Jason Reynolds and Kwame Alexander. I mean, we talk all the time. And it's just, yesterday or the day before, I was in conversation with Matt De La Pena. Like, we all know each other, we all support each other, we all talk to each other. And that's the kind of world I want to live in with my art. And so I think that's why, and I also, it's a place, people say you usually write from the age where you're stuck in, where you have the most work to do. And I do think that was the place where I had a lot of stuff I needed to heal and figure out. And I feel like I'm finally doing it. I've finally done it and I can move on. But even when I was writing for that age, I was still writing for newspapers and magazines and writing poetry and writing adult books and stuff. But it is my favorite audience. Thanks.
Thank you.
There's some over here. There's one way in the back.
Thank you for coming. I really appreciate you. I saw you when I was 18 school when you started did locomotion and came to see our kids. I really appreciate you coming here and the thoughts and your ideas and experiences that you share with us.
Thank you.
I'm here for one of my students who wants to be a writer, and pardon me for asking this question, you hear a lot, but her name is Zoe. She wants to be a writer, and she is in 5th grade. What can you share with her about being a writer or encouraging her to do the thing, the environment, and everything that you can share in this amount of time?
Thank you. So for those who didn't hear the question, it was Zoe's in the 5th grade and wants to be a writer, and what are the things that I could share with Zoe about being a writer. So I've known I wanted to be a writer since I was 7, and many know that I was a very, very, very slow reader. I still am a very, very, very slow reader. I did a whole TED Talk about being a slow reader, and I think that's the first rule of writing is read slowly. I think that when you read slowly, you read as an engaged reader and you study how other authors are doing something, and it really helps you write. I think it's really important to read the stuff you love again and again and study it like a text. And write. Writing's a muscle. So the more you use it, the stronger it gets. And so she should be writing all the time. I don't believe there's any such thing as writer's block. I think that's fear. So I always say when people think they have writer's block, they should write and say, no one is ever going to see this. And if no one's ever going to see it, what would you write? And everything I write, I read out loud because it has to sound a certain way as well as look at a certain way on a page. When I'm feeling fearful, I read it. Well, I read most of my writing in an empty room where no one can hear it. because I want to have it. I want to hear how it sounds safely in the world before I share it. But I just say read, 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 and write, 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 and the rest will come. Question over here?
This is a crack question. So, as a writer myself, and I love your work.
And say that last part.
I was saying I love your work,
Right.
but I wanted to know, what do you do when the work gets hard? Because we all have these ideas, and we're like, yeah, I'm gonna do it. But sometimes you'll get to a point where you're like, I can't look at this. So what do you do?
I can't
What's
look
your
at this.
practice?
So the question is, what do we do when the writing gets hard? When, I have a friend, Michelle Adams. She finished her book. She's writing a nonfiction book. She's a lawyer, which I give her huge credit for because I've seen lawyers write, and she's got a contract and finished a book. So, but I remember, I'm working on my 40th book, I think, and Michelle called me up about 2 years ago, and she's like, Jackie, writing's hard. And I'm like, who are you talking to? Like, it is. Yes, it is hard. And anything we do that we want to do well is hard, right? And here's what happens with writing. I'm going to put on my teacher hat, even though I don't teach anymore. When you're writing and it's coming so well. It's so beautiful. You're a genius. Everyone's going to love it. You're writing the great American novel. It's brilliant. And then you wake up, you reread your pages, and they're trash, right? And then, and this is the most important part of writing. This is the difference between being an aspiring writer and a published writer. It's because everything you write is going to fall apart and be trash. And that's when the scaffolding has to start, and that's when it gets hard. And that's when you have to say, what does this character want, and how are they going to get it? Yeah. You're not asking what it's about, because it's about so many things. But what do they want? How are they going to get it? And then they go on the hero's journey to getting it. So read about the hero's journey. It's a bunch of steps, and that's how you write a novel. But I remember my son was playing the drums, and he wanted to stop playing the drums. They got hard, and then he was playing the piano, and then the piano got hard. And I was like, no, you're not getting another instrument. Like everything's going to get to that point of getting hard, and then that's when the work comes. So that scaffolding that comes, some people call it hard. I call it where the book falls apart. Because almost 40 books, every book has gotten to that point where it falls apart and it's really not readable, and I have to start building it and making it what it's going to be. So think about that hard place as a place where the real work begins. And and some people will say, okay, I'm putting this one aside, I'm gonna start a new one. Same thing's gonna happen, and you have 40 half-finished books because each one is gonna get to that place.
Thank you.
And sometimes that falling apart involves research, right? Stopping to research, stopping to figure out the setting of your character. Like, maybe you just need more information to keep it going.
Thank you. What came to mind is, that question always comes up, right? What do I do with writer's block? Why am I stuck in this place? And I always say, maybe it's a door that doesn't want to be open yet. Leave it alone. It doesn't mean that you have it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Walk a step away from it for a minute and come back.
Yeah. Write something else until it comes back. I'm usually working on 2 or 3 books at a time. And then I finally have to finish one.
Do you read other people's books while you're writing?
Not while I'm writing, no.
Okay.
I mean, I read books that I've read, like I'll read Carson McCullers or Raymond Carver. I read James Baldwin. I have a couple of books that are on my shelf that are books I go to and just read passages out of to get my brain back into writing. But I don't read new fiction for sure.
Yeah.
And I don't, and I can't read books that people give me. So.
Right. Where am I going to do with the one I brought then? No, I was going to say, right, it's true, because my fear is always that I'll write something and I'll think, oh, it's the coolest thing I've ever written, and then I'll think, well, did it come from something I'm reading right now? Right, it's my fear, but,
That's so funny.
I'm always, anyway. Do we have another question? I could talk to you all night, but I know that you are.
Oh.
Oh, yay, up there.
You work so hard. What does retirement look
I feel like what does retirement look like? I feel like for a lot of us, the pandemic broke us a little bit. Like either people stopped working or they didn't stop working. They started working harder because, it was seamless. You were in your house, the work was there. So I feel like I need to think about working less or getting back to the boundaries around my work because I'm always writing. Like I'm writing on the plane, I'm writing on the train. I have I have a screenplay that I need to put. I wrote the screenplay for Red at the Bone. We're gonna start shooting in March. Cynthia Erivo's playing the lead. Oh, I'm so excited. So, but I gotta make some changes on it. So I am always writing and I feel like I am definitely writing slower now. I have like a couple of more books that I want to write, but I don't feel any urgency. Like it's not like I got to get this done. And I procrastinate a lot. Like I travel, I hang out with people, I sew, I do stuff, and I find myself doing that more and more. But I don't know. I don't know if writers ever really retire because it's not like you can turn the stories in your head off. And writing also keeps me sane.
Yeah. That is a truth about the world, right?
Yeah.
There's always some place to go.
Yeah. Oh, this one right there.
What do you sew?
Say it again.
What do you sew?
Oh, what do I sew? I make a lot of clothes. I make quilts sometimes. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I used to make all my kids' clothes. That was a real good procrastination. It's like, oh, I need to make you a new outfit. I can't finish that book. But also, when you're sewing, when you're putting pattern pieces together, you are kind of figuring out plot stuff in your head. So it does help me with writing.
Oh, we'll go with.
How did you know at 7 years old you wanted to write?
I knew so the question was, how did I know at 7 that I wanted to write? I knew I loved story and I wanted to tell story. And it was the same time that I was learning how to write my name and realizing that when you put letters together, they make words and words make sentences and sentences make paragraphs. And so I made that connection. It's like, I want to do this for the rest of my life. And every time I heard a good story, it's like, I want to do that.
So we are
Oh.
going to stop at the Whitwell question and then we'll stop so that we can make the transition.
Thank you for being here. Ken and I drove down from Seattle.
Thank you.
To be in this space and to be with everyone here. I listened to a podcast interview that you were doing, and you mentioned that Ta-Nehisi Coates had teased you about how lean your books are.
Yes.
And so I'm curious the leanness of this, if there's any detail in this story that surprised you that you included.
And Remember Us?
Remember, I'm sorry to your larger works, but I'm just curious. I love that little tidbit when you shared that.
So it's funny because Ta-Nehisi and I are friends. We both live in Brooklyn, and we were trading books. He was giving me The Water Dancer, and I gave him Red at the Bone, and he's like, "Oh, you trying to write one of those books that people are gonna want to read and people are gonna finish?" I'm not gonna say the word he said, but it was so funny to me because The Water Dancer is a thick book. I think that what I learned about writing, especially in the past probably 7 books of mine, was that it's about getting the emotional core on the page, and you can do that without a lot of words, and that you're not just working with words, you're working with the white space on the page, you're working with the length of the word, of the sentences, you're working with how they're structured on the page so that the reader breathes at certain points, or like sees 2 double spaces and knows, let me take a pause and go back and revisit that. So all of that is is interacting with the narrative in a different way than just sitting and reading straight across. And so even a book like Remember Us, I think that book should take a couple of days to read because there's so much in it to sit with, you know, and just think about and figure out. And the same thing with Red at the Bone. Red at the Bone goes back and forth in time and is told from many points of view. And the sitting with it is not even just figuring out who's speaking and when and where we are in the story, but with the language inside of each of their narratives. That was so important for me to get on the page in a certain way so that the reader could have a certain kind of interaction with it. Did that answer it?
Yeah, good. I love that little detail. So
Yeah.
I think like it's cool to understand white space and how you think about it means something.
Yeah. Like Brown Girl Dreaming, people ask me why that's in verse. And it's in verse because it's memory. And memory comes to us in these small moments with all of this white space around it. It doesn't come to us as chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. So I never understand memoirs that are written like that, because it's like, that's not how we remember our lives. But then when I was writing that, first writing down all the memories, and then having to figure out the narrative arc of the memoir, and then having to figure out the line breaks and how the breath flowed with each poem, and what the reader from the beginning of the poem till the end of the poem was going to feel, how it was going to change what they thought. So that book I rewrote like 30 times and took like 3 years to write, just because it was so many levels of things to figure out within the book. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. All right, can we get an ovation? This is right. We're standing up, let's go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.